My beloved child, something about your soulmate is shifting, and you may already be feeling it before you can explain it. There is a reason certain memories of this person keep returning when you least expect them, a reason their face suddenly appears in your thoughts during quiet moments, and a reason your heart seems to pause whenever you imagine finally standing in front of them again. This is not about forcing a moment or chasing someone who is distant. It is about the emotional distance between two people beginning to feel different. Your soulmate has been carrying a feeling they have struggled to put into words, and the most surprising part is this: the moment they imagine seeing you, they do not imagine a complicated conversation first. They imagine closeness. They imagine looking into your eyes and finally allowing the emotions they have been holding back to speak for them. There is something deeply human about that kind of moment. Sometimes a person can write 100 messages and still not say what their heart truly means. Sometimes one look can reveal everything. And your soulmate may be approaching that exact realization. You may have thought the long-awaited moment would arrive with some dramatic announcement, some perfectly planned sentence, or some obvious sign. But what if it arrives much more simply? What if the first thing that happens is silence, followed by the feeling that neither of you wants to step away? Stay with this message, because the deeper truth about that moment is not what you expect. There is an emotional detail your soulmate has been replaying privately, and when you understand what it means, you may finally understand why this connection has felt impossible to forget. There is a moment your soulmate keeps imagining that they have never fully admitted to anyone. They imagine being close enough to you that all the explanations become unnecessary. They imagine the hesitation disappearing, the distance becoming smaller, and the uncertainty finally losing its power. And this is where the story becomes more powerful than the simple idea of a reunion. Your soulmate may not simply want to see you. They may want to feel what it is like to be near you without pretending they are unaffected. Think about how powerful that is. A person can act confident from a distance. They can stay busy, remain quiet, appear completely fine, and convince themselves that they have moved forward. But when the possibility of seeing someone special becomes real, emotions can rise in ways that logic cannot control. That may be what is happening within your soulmate right now. They are beginning to understand that avoiding the feeling never truly erased it. It only made the feeling quieter. And quiet feelings can become the strongest ones because they have had time to grow beneath the surface. There is also something they may want you to notice when you finally meet. They want you to see the difference between who they were before and who they are becoming now. They do not want the moment to be about proving something. They want it to feel genuine. They want the first few seconds to tell a story that words could never tell. Perhaps that is why the thought of a hug keeps appearing in this connection. A hug, in this story, is not merely physical closeness. It represents relief, recognition, warmth, and the emotional release of two people who have spent too much time wondering what the other person truly feels. And there is one particular reason your soulmate may be holding on to that image so strongly. Somewhere inside, they believe that being near you will make something finally feel clear. But listen carefully, because this is where the hidden part begins. Your soulmate may have imagined this reunion more than once, and every time, the details change, but one thing remains the same. They keep wondering what your expression will look like when you see them. That question matters more than you realize. They may be thinking, will they still feel something? Will they recognize the person I have become? Will they be happy to see me? These are not questions asked by someone who feels nothing. These are questions asked by someone who cares deeply about how they will be received by the person who still matters to them. And perhaps you have been wondering whether they remember you in the same emotional way you remember them. The truth may be closer than you think. People remember specific moments when someone made them feel understood. They remember a certain smile, a particular conversation, a quiet moment that seemed ordinary at the time but became unforgettable later. Your soulmate may be holding on to one of those moments right now. Something you said. Something you did. Perhaps even something you never realized mattered. And that memory may be one of the reasons they continue feeling drawn toward the possibility of seeing you again. Here is the part that may surprise you. The long-awaited moment may not feel dramatic at first. It may feel strangely peaceful. You may notice their eyes before you hear their words. You may notice a pause before they move closer. You may notice that familiar feeling returning before either of you says what you have been waiting to say. And when that happens, do not underestimate the power of the silence. Sometimes silence is where the truth becomes impossible to hide. Your soulmate may realize in that instant that the connection they tried to understand from a distance is something they can only truly understand when you are standing right there. That is why this message is not asking you to chase the moment. Let it unfold naturally. The more you release the need to control every detail, the more meaningful the moment can become. And now, there is one final piece you need to hear before this part ends, because it changes the way you should look at everything that has happened between you and your soulmate. The reunion is not only about them coming closer to you. It is also about what happens inside you when you realize that the person you once wondered about is standing in front of you again. You may discover that you are not the same person who waited for answers before. You may feel calmer, stronger, more certain about what you deserve. And that inner change can transform the entire atmosphere of the meeting. Your soulmate may expect to see the old version of you, the one they remember, the one they may have thought about during quiet nights. But instead, they may see someone whose presence carries a completely different kind of confidence. That could be the moment that surprises them most. Not because you say something extraordinary, but because you do not need to. Your presence itself communicates that you have grown. And when their eyes meet yours, there may be a second where everything else seems to fade into the background. No perfect speech. No rehearsed explanation. Just recognition. Then comes the question your heart has been waiting for: will they finally step closer? Will they finally allow the emotion they have been protecting to become visible? This is why the image of that long-awaited hug carries so much emotional weight. It represents the moment when hesitation becomes honesty. It represents the possibility of two people finally standing close enough to stop guessing. And if that moment arrives, remember this: you do not have to force the words. You do not have to make the moment perfect. Sometimes the most powerful reunion begins with nothing more than two people realizing that, after everything, they still feel something real when they are near each other. And just when you think you understand what this reunion means, there is another layer waiting beneath it, something your soulmate has been quietly deciding about the future of this connection. That is where the next chapter begins. There is something your soulmate has been realizing in the quiet moments when nobody else can see what is happening inside their heart. The possibility of finally being close to you is making them question everything they once believed about this connection. They may have spent a long time telling themselves that they should simply move forward, stop thinking so much, and let the past remain where it belongs. But emotions do not always follow the plans we make for them. And lately, one thought may have become impossible for them to ignore. What if the story between you and them is not finished? That question can change everything. Because when someone truly believes a chapter is over, they stop imagining the next page. Your soulmate, however, may still be imagining it. They may be picturing your face, your reaction, the first words exchanged, and most importantly, the moment when the emotional distance finally disappears. There is a reason the idea of a hug feels so significant here. It is not simply about affection. It is about finally feeling safe enough to stop pretending. Your soulmate may have carried emotions they never knew how to explain, and being near you could bring all of those feelings to the surface at once. They might suddenly remember tiny details they thought they had forgotten. The way you looked at them. The way your presence changed the atmosphere around you. The way even an ordinary conversation somehow stayed in their mind long after it ended. And there is something else happening beneath all of this. They may be realizing that missing someone is not always about wanting the past back. Sometimes it is about recognizing that a person still has a place in your heart, even after time has passed. That realization can be powerful enough to make someone reconsider what they truly want. So if you have felt lately that something about this connection seems emotionally different, do not dismiss that feeling too quickly. The story may be moving into a completely different chapter. One where your soulmate is no longer only remembering you but seriously imagining what it would feel like to stand beside you again. Now pay attention to this next part, because this is where your soulmate's inner conflict becomes important. They may want to come closer, yet they may also wonder whether you would welcome them. They may think about reaching out, then hesitate. They may imagine saying everything they feel, then suddenly become quiet because the emotions seem too big to organize into words. This does not necessarily mean they have stopped caring. Sometimes hesitation appears precisely because something matters so much. When a person has nothing to lose, they can act without thinking. But when someone fears losing something meaningful, every step can feel significant. Your soulmate may be standing at that emotional crossroads right now. One side of them wants to move toward you. Another side keeps asking whether the timing, circumstances, or emotions are right. And that is why the reunion you have been imagining may happen differently than you expect. It may not begin with a perfect sentence. It may begin with a look. A pause. A smile that lasts a second longer than usual. A moment where both of you realize that the connection still has a pulse. And then, perhaps, they step closer. Not because someone forced them to. Not because they were pressured. But because the emotional distance suddenly feels unnecessary. Imagine what that could feel like after all the uncertainty. Imagine seeing the person you have wondered about standing directly in front of you and realizing that the feeling you thought had disappeared is still there. Your soulmate may experience that realization even more intensely than you expect. They may have spent so much time analyzing the connection from a distance that being physically near you could make everything feel completely different. The mind can create endless questions, but presence can answer some questions without words. And perhaps that is why this long-awaited moment carries such emotional weight. It is not about creating a fantasy. It is about two people finally having the opportunity to experience what has existed between them without the interference of distance, assumptions, or endless overthinking. The most powerful part may be the simplicity of it. You will not need to explain every emotion immediately. You may simply look at each other and understand that something important has survived. And here is the revelation your soulmate may not even fully understand yet: they are not only moving toward you emotionally, they are becoming more honest with themselves. For a long time, they may have tried to separate what they felt from what they believed they were supposed to feel. They may have told themselves that they should be practical, that they should ignore certain memories, or that enough time should have erased the connection. But every time the memory returned, something inside them quietly disagreed. They may have discovered that there are certain people you can stop talking to without ever truly becoming indifferent toward them. You can create distance and still carry their presence in your thoughts. You can become busy and still remember their voice. You can tell yourself you are ready to move forward and still feel something shift when their name appears unexpectedly. That may be what your soulmate has been experiencing. And now the possibility of seeing you again is forcing them to confront that truth. They may be asking themselves a question they avoided for a long time: if I still feel this strongly, why am I pretending that I do not? That question can become the turning point. Because once a person becomes honest with themselves, their actions often begin to change naturally. They may become more open, more expressive, more willing to take a step instead of endlessly thinking about taking one. And when that step finally happens, it may surprise you because it could come at a moment when you are no longer expecting it. That is the strange beauty of emotional timing. Sometimes the moment arrives after you have stopped trying to predict it. Sometimes the person you thought would never make the first move suddenly finds the courage to come closer. And when your soulmate does, watch their energy more than their words. Notice whether they linger instead of leaving quickly. Notice whether their eyes search for your reaction. Notice whether their expression softens when they realize you are genuinely happy to see them. Those details can reveal more than a carefully prepared speech ever could. But before you imagine the reunion as the ending of the story, understand this: the hug may actually be the beginning of the most important conversation you and your soulmate have ever had. Not necessarily a conversation filled with dramatic explanations, but one built around honesty. The kind where both people finally stop trying to protect themselves from every possible outcome. Your soulmate may realize that being close to you feels different from simply thinking about you. They may realize that the person they remembered is still capable of making their heart feel unexpectedly calm. And you may realize something too. You may realize that you no longer need to chase an answer because the moment itself is giving you information. The way they approach you. The way they look at you. The way they react when the distance between you disappears. All of it matters. And if that long-awaited hug happens, let it be a moment of recognition rather than pressure. Let it say, I remember. Let it say, I still care. Let it say, we are finally here. Because sometimes the most powerful reunion is not the one where everything is immediately solved. It is the one where two people finally feel that they can stop running from what they already know inside. Your soulmate may have been carrying a quiet question for longer than you realize, and the answer may become clearer the moment they are standing close to you. But there is still one hidden emotion they have not completely revealed, a feeling connected to the exact reason they want that hug so badly. And once that emotion comes to the surface, you may understand why this connection has remained so difficult for both of you to forget. There is a deeper reason your soulmate may be longing for that moment of closeness, and it has almost nothing to do with words. Somewhere beneath everything they have said, everything they have left unsaid, and every moment they tried to act as though they were unaffected, there may be one simple desire: they want to know whether the connection still feels the same when you are standing right in front of them. Distance can make people question everything. It can make memories feel larger, smaller, clearer, or more confusing. But presence is different. Presence has a way of cutting through all the stories we create inside our minds. Your soulmate may have wondered whether you still care, whether you remember the little things, whether you would recognize the person they have become, and whether there is still a place for them in your heart. Yet there is another question they may be asking themselves even more quietly: what if I finally see them and realize I never truly stopped caring? That possibility may be both beautiful and overwhelming to them. Because if they have spent a long time trying to organize their emotions, one genuine moment with you could change the entire picture. Imagine them seeing you from across a room or approaching you after a period of distance. At first, they may try to remain composed. They may tell themselves to act normal. But then their eyes meet yours, and something familiar returns instantly. Not necessarily a dramatic rush, but a quiet recognition. The kind that makes you realize some connections are remembered not only by the mind, but by the heart. That is why the long-awaited hug carries such emotional meaning. It could become the first moment where neither of you has to wonder whether the other person feels something. The closeness itself becomes an answer. And your soulmate may be hoping for exactly that kind of answer. But there is something they may be afraid to admit: they want the first moment with you to feel safe. Not perfect. Not cinematic. Not rehearsed. Safe. They may want to know that they can finally lower the emotional walls they have carried for so long without being judged for everything that happened before. They may want to approach you without having to explain every hesitation immediately. They may want to feel that the person they once trusted is still somewhere beneath all the distance and misunderstandings. And that desire can explain why they keep imagining a hug instead of a long conversation. A hug can communicate something words sometimes struggle to express: I am here. I remember you. You still matter to me. Your soulmate may not know exactly how the reunion will unfold, but they may know how they want it to feel. They want warmth. They want recognition. They want that brief moment where neither person is analyzing the past or predicting the future. They simply want to experience the connection as it is. And perhaps you have noticed that your own thoughts sometimes become unusually emotional when this person comes to mind. That does not mean you need to interpret every coincidence as a promise. It simply means the connection has left an emotional imprint, and those imprints can remain powerful long after circumstances change. Your soulmate may have one memory in particular that they return to when they think about you. It could be something incredibly ordinary: a conversation, a smile, a moment of silence, the way you looked at them when they needed understanding. What makes it important is not what happened. It is how they felt in that moment. And when they imagine seeing you again, they may secretly hope they can feel that same sense of being understood. That is why their desire to come closer may be stronger than their desire to explain everything immediately. Now comes the part that may completely change how you understand their hesitation. Your soulmate may not be waiting for you to prove your feelings. They may be trying to prove something to themselves. They need to know whether they are brave enough to stop living inside uncertainty and finally acknowledge what their heart has been saying. For someone who has spent a long time thinking instead of acting, one small step can feel enormous. Walking toward you could represent more than physical distance. It could represent leaving behind an old version of themselves, the version that overanalyzed every possibility, waited for perfect circumstances, or kept emotions hidden because vulnerability felt uncomfortable. And when that person finally steps forward, the most meaningful thing may be what happens in the few seconds before the hug. The hesitation. The eye contact. The realization that neither of you is turning away. Those seconds could carry more emotional weight than an entire conversation. Your soulmate may look at you as if trying to memorize the moment because, in their mind, they have imagined it so many times. They may wonder whether you can see how much they have changed. They may wonder whether you can sense how much they have missed the connection. And then the distance becomes smaller. The moment becomes real. The emotions that were easy to hide from far away become impossible to ignore up close. This is where the story becomes deeply personal. Because you may also have changed during the time apart. You may no longer need the same answers you once needed. You may no longer be willing to accept confusion simply because your heart is attached. And that growth matters. If your soulmate comes closer, let the moment reveal what is real rather than forcing it to become something it is not. The strongest connections do not need pressure to prove themselves. They become clearer through consistency, honesty, and the way two people choose to treat each other.